Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Furman and racing analyst Chris Wormy.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, the Bet the Board production, part of the Wondery Podcast Network. We shift our focus away from the road course at Circuit of the Americas last Sunday in the NASCAR Cup Series and train our eyes on Richmond, Virginia, a 3/4 of a mile flat oval. I am your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and racing analyst, Chris Wormy. And Wormser, COTA was great for what felt like about 65 laps, and then all hell broke loose, and it was the Indy Road Course 2.0.
It's just so hard. The end of the race should not, for one, it shouldn't last that long. And two, you just can't have guys driving in like a bunch of assholes and just not caring where they end up. And it's, I'll say this, as much as it was really hard to watch the back of the pack, I thought that the first two rows, for the most part, were so clean on those restarts. It was like shockingly refreshing to see the way that Kyle Busch raced, William Byron and Alex Bowman and Tyler Reddick. I thought that was really, really impressive driving. What Tyler Reddick did on multiple restarts at a road course was not easy, and it was awesome to see someone like him, who's a great road course racer in his own right, survive that many green-white checkers when it is just not easy at all to do.
Well, we saw the best car win on Sunday, and we've seen that more often, at least through the first handful of races this year, than we did last year, and we'll get to that in a moment. For those folks tuning into the Stay Green podcast for the first time, or maybe you've forgotten, you can follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisWormy15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast and all things Bet the Board at Bet the Board Pod. The podcast broken up into 3 segments. Stage 1, a little bit of recap and review. Want to talk about the odds and some of the things that we saw transpire. Stage 2, more about betting philosophy on this show, and we'll address some of the nuances when it comes to betting the Xfinity and Truck Series as well. And Stage 3, the longest and most important portion of the program, where we do a deep dive of this upcoming weekend's race. And no special guest here to help us with the heavy lifting, Worm, so you better make sure that you're entertaining, you're informative, and you're insightful. And you mentioned Tyler Reddick, most dominant driver in practice and the race, wins COTA going off at a price shy of 5-1 at most books. And unlike last year, where you felt like you could find a lot of value in the outright market the day of the race, doesn't appear to be the case so far in 2023.
Well, you brought up a good point that we haven't quite seen the variance at the end of the race where you don't have the best car winning. Like, the best car has typically won. I mean, I guess at Phoenix, you could say there were moments when William Byron was the best. There was moments when Kevin Harvick was the best. There was moments when Larson was the best. But those were the 3 best cars by a long shot. But at most of the tracks this year, you're kind of seeing the best car win. Even at a place like Atlanta, where it's super, super difficult to kind of pick a winner, I still thought that the best car was Joey Logano, and he went out there and was able to win. So week to week, we're just seeing those favorites actually kind of be more true to odds and not necessarily a ton of value up front unless you pick them up earlier in the week before the market moves.
Well, and that's always the challenging part. If you're going to look to invest on some of these drivers, you need to be able to sometimes catch lightning in a bottle. In the case of Tyler Reddick, he, of course, was available at 10-1 earlier in the week. After practice, those odds shortened substantially. And you mentioned a lack of variance in terms of the outright winner. Unfortunately for us and listeners of Stay Green that took advantage of our best bet on Sunday with a matchup, Christopher Bell over Ryan Blaney, laid $1.40, watch it close $1.90, led that race by the better part of 20 to 25 positions. And going back to what you said off the top about guys just dive bombing into these corners, knowing that if they're not going to wreck the driver in front of them, they're going to get wrecked by somebody behind. Variance has played a major role in determining who wins some of these head-to-head matchups. And I know for you and I, that's where we do a lion's share of our betting, as most professionals do, it can become an endless source of frustration.
I told my wife, I'm like, remind me to never bet this race again. I was so mad during these green-white checkers. I mean, the fact that Ross Chastain could like essentially wreck out and go to the rear, and then 2 green-white checkers later be racing for the lead, it's just like, what just happened? Like, how do you even go up 24 spots in 2 restarts when they don't even go a full lap before the caution comes out? So and when you reward someone like that's a super aggressive driver like Ross Chastain, by having him finish 4th when he's just diving it in there clearly without any care and just using someone else's tires to help stop him, man, I think it was a little bit of a black eye to what I thought was a good race. I'm still really happy that Tyler Reddick won. I think as handicappers and people that are trying to make money betting this sport, whenever the best car wins, I'm all for it, even if I don't have that driver. So unfortunately,
I think that's a great point. You want things to go true to form, that you're rewarded for your hard work, instead of an industry where you don't want to be sitting there flipping coins going, man, I hope this thing comes up heads 6 out of 10 times.
Sure. And I think, so what did we learn here? I think there's a reason we go through this kind of first stage is, you know what? I think next year I will be much lighter in matchups. Maybe stick to guys that can win the race.
You are so full of shit. I'm gonna break this clip off right now and play it back for you 72 hours before COTA, and you're gonna have a full matchup card because you're champing at the bit for the first road course of the year, assuming the schedule stays the same.
But I'll tell you what, it would have been a clean sweep of everything that we had it just stayed green. Hence the name of the podcast. I was sitting there saying stay green. Although we did have fuel was an issue, and it's been a while since we've had a fuel race. I mean, we used to stress about that, 6 or 7 years ago when it seemed like every race was a fuel fest. But with the institution of these, the cautions or the stage cautions or stage breaks, we haven't quite seen that because usually they can stop and then obviously make it to the end on one stop. So definitely a different game. It was really weird to see how the race played out without these stage breaks. And I can't believe that did you see how Ty Gibbs cost himself a point by taking one extra spot to shoot for the right lane? Because I think the start of stage 3 was the end of stage 2 with the cautions, and he took the one lane and was in 10th, decided to go to 11th, and when they crossed the line, he actually cost himself a stage point, which is just kind of crazy. You don't even think about that, but I think that you'll have crew chiefs paying attention in the future to something, so that way it doesn't cost them a point in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that obviously falls on the spotters to try and instruct the driver that are paying attention to so much that's going on. I mean, it's only Kyle Busch in the Truck Series that can serve as his crew chief, his engineer, and the driver, deciding when he wants to come into pit, when he wants to stay out. And we'll get to the Truck Series a little bit later on. But yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting dynamic. And I know the length of NASCAR races has been called into question about ways to shorten them. They want to get into a 3-hour window. It's something I never thought I'd say because I bitch to you all the time for the handful of IndyCar races that we bet when a race ends under caution. I'm starting to go back to the old school NASCAR approach, and I know NASCAR won't do it because they love the drama. They love wreckers to checkers, where after 1, maybe 2 attempts at a green-white checker, throw the white flag. Say, hey, you know what? We've tried it. We don't need to wreck that many more race cars. But I guess when parts are this cheap and you have that level of parity, it's not a big deal. And knowing that NASCAR stances have at it, I mean, this is essentially what we're going to get. And you had a quote from Elton Sawyer, who's NASCAR's senior VP of competition, earlier this week on SiriusXM, asked him what he thought. He goes, basically, we didn't see anything that crossed the line. Our DNA for 74 plus years has been aggressive driving. That's great to say in theory, and I know you want to keep people captivated, but look, when people like you and I are sick and tired of watching late race restarts that take an hour to race the final 3 laps, that's college basketball and the NBA where they drag on the final minute with 37 timeouts times 100, and it's really going to turn off the casual race fan that we're trying to get to commit his or her Saturdays or Sundays to watching the sport we love.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I've even heard doing away with green-white checkers. It's almost like you want maybe one, but after that, it's like, hey, there's like this sweet spot where one green-white checkered is, really exciting for the fans. 2 is like, okay, this is ridiculous. But then you get 3 or 4. It's like, okay, what are we doing right now? This is not even racing at this point. It's just send it off there into one. Yeah, it's just send it off into one and hope that if you can't make it stick, that the car to your outside can make it stick. And it was just, to be honest, they could have thrown another caution with Chris Bell. I mean, I guarantee that there was fluid on the track with his nose pushed in like that. So I think that at that point, I just was like, oh, they won't throw the caution because they need this to get over. At this point, this is dragging out way too long. Yeah. And it just makes it really hard for these late race matchups. Like I said, I'm still happy that the best car won. It would have been terrible if all of a sudden Reddick and Kyle Busch and some of the other guys up front had taken each other out, and then you get someone like Kevin Harvick who ran like 15th all day to win the race. I don't like it when that happens, but I guess we can't have it's not a perfect world, but I guess we'll take the finish with Reddick up top. And by the way, we can just put to bed whether last year was the car or the driver.
I think it's the driver.
Tyler Reddick is a damn good road course racer, and to do it 3 or 4 times late race restarts when everybody's gunning for you, I thought it was really, really impressive. And I'll be the first to say that I was 100% wrong saying I thought Kyle Busch was a better road course racer than Tyler Reddick. It's just not the case right now. Tyler Reddick and probably AJ Allmendinger are the 2 best on road courses, and I don't even think it's close.
Hey, one last, don't forget Chase Elliott, too. I don't think, I'm not willing to throw the baby out with the bathwater just yet. One last thing, by the way, before we wave our green-white checker flag on stage 1. Some of the feedback that came from non-traditional NASCAR drivers that got out there to try and help grow the international appeal. When you have a driver like Jenson Button who won at F1, Kimi Räikkönen out there, Jordan Taylor a little bit different. But when those guys are saying, hey, look, we're all for aggressive racing, but it's almost an embarrassment there. I don't like the fact that you have NASCAR traditionalists and those folks that want to defend the sport that just cast aspersions at those drivers. Justin Marks is doing this as an initiative to grow the sport. And if we're not going to listen to some of that feedback from world-class drivers, what are we doing here? And so for me, those were some of the bigger takeaways that were there. It was good to see Denny Hamlin support some of the things they said, and hopefully we can find a decent medium between racing aggressively and racing like idiots when we go to road course another 5 times this season.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is just the turn 1. We're going to see it at Indy. And Todd, hey, I will not be betting that much on that. I almost said not at all. That's not true. I'll probably bet something at the Indy road course.
We're going to take bombs for top 10s. Just take bombs for top 10s. Hope that they race at the back as a 25th place car all day. Sit back and they can drive right through the carnage the same way you would treat a super speedway.
Yeah, and then watch it. It'll just go green the whole race, and the best cars will win. And it was like, oh, man, of course we're on the sidelines. But if there's no caution, I think that road course, if there's no caution at COTA towards the end of the race and no caution at Indy, I think that road courses are super bettable. I think that I love the strategy. Even Tyler Reddick pitting 1 extra time and still thumping everybody, I thought was great. But you can't have just a 90-degree turn without a runoff area. You just can't. And we see it at Indy and we see it at COTA this year. Not a fan of it. But yeah, I'm happy for Tyler Reddick.
Told you, one step closer to getting my figure 8 racetrack. I mean, that can't have that many more wrecks than what we've seen so far with some of these slow first corners that are out there. So, obviously, we'll adjust, and it's the kind of thing that if you're a sports bettor and you're going to do this with any level of success, you have to be willing to evolve and adapt. And maybe it's simplifying the approach that, hey, look, knowing some of the uncertainty that we'll see at COTA and Indy, you can still bet head-to-head matchups. You just don't want to be caught laying big prices, knowing that it becomes a coin flip. And if you're consistently taking plus 140s and plus 150s with some of those wrecks working in your favor, you'll be in a good spot.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You can follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisWormy15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Again, most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Stage 2, Worm, we've had some great guests over the last couple of weeks, decided that we needed to take the floor back on our own show. We'll see who we can nail down next week potentially for the dirt race at Bristol, but want to go back and revisit some betting basics. And I've gotten a number of questions from people in terms of how guys like you and I approach betting the other series that are out there. And I know we run into some different limitations than a recreational bettor will. When it comes to limits, you obviously have the opportunity to move a little bit more liquidity in the cup market, whether that be outrights, head-to-heads, top 3s, top 5s, top 10s, what have you. But when you look at the Truck Series, the Xfinity, I know you track practice times, I know you watch practices, you read all the driver quotes. Is it suffice to say that you do the lion's share of your betting in the Cup Series, or are you heavily diversified across all 3 series when you see an opportunity worth exploiting?
Well, I think the biggest difference is the markets. Like, you just have way more betting options when it comes to the Cup Series. And I think that's why I'm able to get more down or have more out or more plays, I would say. And the other reason for that is you have not as many competitive drivers. So if you're betting, let's just say you're betting a matchup, Justin Allgaier versus Sammy Smith. Those are both in the Xfinity Series. Let's just say you have Allgaier, you like him at minus 120. Let's just say you made it minus 160, so you're getting a little bit of value. Remember that there's probably only going to be 3 cars between Sammy Smith and Justin Allgaier throughout the entire day. Like the difference between, and that's actually a pretty big advantage because you only have like 10, 12 cars that can even win the race. So if you're betting guys that can win the race, they're only going to be separated by 2 or 3 spots. Whereas in the Cup Series, like for most of the day, we had this Chris Bell minus 140 over Ryan Blaney. He was beating it by 20 spots. Yeah, I know that Blaney had an issue, but
Blaney was a lap down. He was a lap down for a good portion of the day. And we're not talking about Bristol where we get infinite amount of yellows.
Yeah. But that's the thing. You're going to get, these matchups where you're going to, in the Cup Series, where you're going to have drivers that are separated by 15 or 16 spots. Whereas in the lower series, especially the Truck Series, you might only be separated by 2 or 3 spots the entire day. Now, usually if you're betting these matchups and you have an edge, or at least you think you have an edge, that's fine. I'm okay if a laying a price of minus 120, as long as I know that if he ever ends up behind the driver that he's matched up against, he's able to pass them in the next 10 or 15 laps. I know it's arbitrary based on lap size, but I just want to make sure that they're able to pass that driver back. But ultimately, it is very, very different betting the different series. Obviously, limits are a little bit higher when it comes to the Cup Series, but both markets or all markets are very fragile. I don't think that the Truck Series is any more fragile than, let's just say, the Cup Series. I mean, they all move very much.
Yep.
So I don't think that there's any difference there, but I think it's just the limits are a little bit lower, and then also the competition. You have to understand that there's not going to be that many drivers separating 2 really good drivers in the Truck Series or the Xfinity Series, where you could have massive amounts of drivers in the Cup Series.
You mean having a better truck like Ross Chastain at a modest price against Corey Haim? That's so much better. He can change a fuel pump and still win his head-to-head matchup?
Unbelievable. I mean, that was a fast truck. I mean, really fast.
I mean, that's a race-winning truck without the issue there. I mean, I would have loved to see a drag race between him and Kyle Busch if all things stayed equal.
Well, yeah.
Obviously, Chastain dealt with equipment issues and Busch dealt with strategy concerns, but I felt as racing fans we got cheated out of having those 2 guys up front. But credit Chandler. It was Chandler Smith, right? Not Zane Smith that won the race. I always get
Zane Smith, yeah.
Credit Zane Smith. He just stayed out of trouble. Knew he didn't have a race-winning car initially, but he let everybody else around him kind of crater, and he was able to keep that 4.5 to 5 seconds of separation.
Todd, that's a perfect point talking about Chastain in the Truck Series. Here's an example of a guy that changes a fuel pump and goes to the rear during the last green flag run. He goes from 30th to 5th with 0 cautions. That would not happen in the Cup Series. No chance. But that's just the difference in the competitiveness of the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series versus the Cup Series. That just wouldn't happen in the Cup Series. I don't care who you are. It would be really, really tough with 20 laps to go to race from 30th all the way up to 5th. And by the way, if it stays green, there's a chance let's just say he had like 2 stints or 2 full fuel runs, he could have run down the leaders. He was that fast. So that's the difference between the 2 series.
To try and segue into structuring the betting card, and I think this applies across all 3 series, obviously there's very different menus and availability, but credit to some of the bookmakers, we're seeing more expansive Xfinity and truck menus, every state a little bit different, every operator taking different bets there. When it comes to building, and I know we talked about this last season in season 1 of Stay Green, I can't remember which show, about outrights, matchups, top 3, top 5, top 10. The easy crutch here from you is to say, hey, look, Todd, it's price dependent, and that's going to dictate how I build things. But when you're structuring your approach, do you try and look at every market independently? Is there correlation? I mean, how do you go about trying to put yourself in the best position to make sure that you can earn off of everything being offered to you by some of these operators?
Yeah, Yeah, yes, I could have easily just taken the crutch. Well, wherever I think the odds dictate, but whatever is
we'll go there,
EV.
and I want to go there. I want to go there in a second because we did have a unique situation unfold last week that I want to point out. I won't name the book, but I don't want to cut off your train of thought.
Okay, yeah. So sometimes there's drivers that, for lack of a better term, I guess I'll just say you want to cash in on, and that doesn't necessarily mean guys that that you think are going to be great and you want to make money by betting on them somehow. It could be guys that are struggling. Like, listen, I don't care how I fade this guy. I just got to figure out a way to make money off of this driver, good or bad. So I would say when it comes to, I do look at them separately, but also if I have a lot on a guy, maybe top 5 and to win, I don't know that necessarily having the top 3 is also that important. Maybe if it's like a Larson at Homestead, but there's certain guys that you trust more if they have a race winning car that they can go out there and win the race. I guess a perfect example would be at Homestead. Yeah, you want to take Kyle Larson to win the race because if he has a good car, he's going to win, right? Or at least he's going to put himself in a position to win. A guy like Austin Dillon, who's also good at Homestead, I don't think he's going to win. I would rather have him in more of a top 10 or top 5 because I just don't see him going out there and winning the race, but I still want to make money off of him having a good run. So that's when I tend to look at these top 3, top 5, and top 10s. I'll say this. I do play top 5s more than I play top 3s. I don't know if that's just a personal preference, but I just think that I've seen so many guys have a top 3 car and just kind of lose it on a restart and then never get back into the top 3, whereas top 5 gives you, just for whatever reason, you actually get 3 rows on a restart versus just the top 2 or top 1.5, if that makes sense. So that's why I kind of like the top 5s. And top 10s are just guys that I think have value and that are just going to kind of run in the top 10. They might not win, but sometimes it's a really good finish for a guy. And if the price is there and they have the track history of just kind of consistently getting finishes, a top 10 is a great way to make some money or profit off of a driver.
And the other thing with these markets, too, that I think a lot of people fail to account for is they theoretically should all be mathematical derivations of one another. It should be a percentage and a probability applied. I know some books take very creative liberties. When you look at top 3s, I tweeted out the disparity on a Kyle Larson top 10 price, I believe it was, over the weekend. One book as high as 1-7, one book as low as minus 235. The reality of it is, in NASCAR, given that there is a very real mechanical component of it, I'm not laying 1-7 on anything. There is no such thing as that kind of certainty with an implied probability to support a bet like that. But we did have a situation play out in regards to Tyler Reddick. And again, I'm not going to name the book, but Tyler Reddick right around 4-1 outright. One book priced him at plus 220 to finish in the top 3. Yes, I know Tyler Reddick went on to win the race and people want to cash a bigger price tag, but from a mathematics standpoint, that plus 220 bet significantly more expected value than betting him to win the race outright if you're shopping throughout the market.
Yeah, it was, like I said, I typically, and you know this, I don't typically bet a ton of top 3s, but since I understand math, I had no choice but to take that one. I mean, that's like, hey, that to me was a better price than his win. Obviously a better price with the positive EV there. So you just have to look, and it just goes to show you that, whenever we expect the books to like, okay, this is probably what's going to happen, they continue to shock us. Clearly different pools of money there, and they're moving based off that. That would be my guess. Todd, you could probably speak more to that. They just clearly 100%. Had to be different pools.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, once a market gets hung, if you're a bookmaker, you want to book each of those markets independently. Now, the reality of it is, if we're looking at an NFL or college football game, if I'm moving the full game total, typically I should be moving the first half in conjunction with that. But oftentimes you can find betting groups that may bet a first half total under and they may bet a full game over. So you have to be a little bit careful there. And what I say when you're looking for some of these price discrepancies, there's a difference taking advantage of a market that you feel isn't priced correctly versus betting into a stale number that clearly the bookmaker has made a mistake. There are some ethics involved. There's no honor amongst thieves, I know, in this particular field, but you're going to get kicked out of a book faster than anything else. If a driver should be 10-1, he's priced at 100-1, you may be able to pull the wool over that bookmaker's eyes one time, but good luck trying to move money there again. So it always benefits you, and we'll talk about it till we're blue in the face. Everyone has different expectations on race day. Whether it's being a recreational player, whether it's making this a little bit more of a serious pursuit, give yourself multiple books. I'm not saying you need 15 to have opportunities to shop around. But if you're in a state with legalized sports betting in any capacity, at least give yourself 2 or 3. NASCAR may be more than anything else other than golf, where outright prices can widely vary. You're going to find different matchups. You're going to find different betting opportunities, and we want to see everybody cash right alongside with us. Any final thoughts here before we wave the green-white flag on stage 2 and head into a race preview for Richmond this weekend?
Yeah, I just remember the goal is try to reduce the odds makers hold. So if you can just kind of pick the best prices, even if it's like a guy that you normally can see, or let's just say for the most part is like 6.5 to 1 across the board. If you just get that 8 to 1, that's a big deal. And if you can do that with every outright that you have, you're just reducing the hold and increasing the value that you have. And it might not matter week in and
that's the name of the game.
Week,
I mean, you have to be
over
able
the course of a year,
Yep.
It matters a lot.
100%. I mean, if you can reduce a percentage point here, a percentage point there, it may not add up on an individual bet, but the more and more trials, the more and more times you're trying to roll over that bankroll, it is going to pay dividends, to say the least. Again, you can follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisOrme15. I'm Todd Furman. Follow me there, Bet the Board Podcast at Bet the Board Pod. On to Richmond we go, the first of 2 installments at the 3/4 mile flat D-shaped oval, measured 13.5 feet in from the safer barrier with a 60 feet with a 10-foot apron, banking 14 degrees in turns, 8 degrees at the starting line on a 1,290-foot front stretch, 2 degrees on an 860-foot back stretch. Radius of turns, I don't care enough. I wasn't a great geometry student, to say the least. Track comparisons, where we've heard a lot of things thrown about. New Hampshire, Phoenix, Richmond last year. What do you factor into your formula before you try and figure out some of the comps?
This is a tough one. Normally, there's kind of direct comps that you look at. But if you look at, I would just say, for me, I am going to put Phoenix this year as number 1, I would say, is like the closest comp, just because it's going to encompass how guys have been running this year, just speed. You know, for example, William Byron is much faster this year than he was last year. And it had the lower downforce package that we will see this week. But it's really hard. If you look at Richmond last year, it was a tale of 2 completely different races. You had it really, really cold in the spring and not a lot of tire fall off, whereas this in the fall, the race that we went to, you had a lot of tire fall off, more strategy, hot and slick. You had comers and goers, and it was almost like it was a completely different track. So if you're just going to kind of look at all of those things together, it's almost like you really want to take this really big macro view and not place too much emphasis on either one of them. Or either 3 of them, I guess. I don't know. I think this is a really, really hard one to come up with trap comps with. I would say I'm going to take Phoenix this year as probably my number 1. And I don't know if I'm just hoping that there's more fall off this year and hope that it's more like the fall race from last year. But Who knows? With the weather this weekend, it's supposed to be like a high of 60. The sun's going to be out, which is really, really important to the track temperature. So I would say Phoenix, but man, I would say Richmond history is also going to be important. Just the history of getting around that track.
All right, well, speaking of history, I think you've given us a perfect opportunity to start with a couple of the favorites, and we can look at Kevin Harvick, who finished second here in the spring, first in the fall. I know a lot of people call it the summer. I don't really care. Richmond 2 for argument purposes. When he won here last summer for his 8th top 8 result in the last 9 Richmond tries, car got faster with each pit stop, led 55 laps that day. In his career, 4 Richmond wins, 17 top 5s, 29 top 10s, 1,235 laps led, and a low downforce version of the Gen 7 car that we saw earlier this year at Phoenix, where with those long green flag runs, Kevin Harvick's car got significantly better. Even during SHR struggles last year, Harvick was a very difficult out at Richmond. When you look at his market price, widely available 5.5 to 1, 6 to 1, it can be fair. It may not trigger a bet, but want to get your take on the 4 car in one of his penultimate races at a racetrack that he's dominated.
Yikes. I mean, 11 to 2 is short. I mean, this is not the Kevin Harvick that qualified on the pole like every week, you know, like when he did it in, I think it was like 2020 or 2019, where he was just always up front. This to me is it's probably a decent price, or at least a fair market price, but I just don't see him qualifying that well. And I mean, let's just say Kevin Harvick looks really fast in practice. Like, where's he going to go from here?
4.5 to 1.
I mean, I just think you take that risk. I'd rather unload at 4.5 to 1 than take a chance on beating the market at 11 to 2 or even 6 to 1 places. So, and by the way, Phoenix and Richmond are very different tracks. Harvick can really Harvick at Phoenix. You can't do it as much at Richmond. I do expect him to be good, long run, but I just think short run, he hasn't been fast in the short run in a long time. And so if you're looking to get something down on Kevin Harvick, I would wait till live if you have the opportunity. I don't think that there's any reason to rush to that 11 to 2 price at this point in the week, though.
From the 4 car to the 20 car, driven by Christopher Bell. 6th in the spring here, 2nd in Richmond 2, 5 Cup starts at Richmond. He's averaged a 6th place finish, which is best amongst all active drivers. Also dominated at this track when he was in the Xfinity Series as well. One of the best short track racers in the business right now, and clearly this is a track where he feels right at home. At Phoenix earlier this year, Bell ran inside the top 5 for 72% of the race. That was 3rd best in the series. Christopher Bell, 8 to 1. Buying, selling, holding.
I'm holding right now, but I could see this price actually dropping if Bell looks good. Again, he's not a guy that just comes out out of a cannon right off the truck. Usually they have to work on that car a little bit, but man, has he just been consistent. If it weren't for the 2 essentially DNFs that he had at Fontana and Coda, I mean, he's 3rd, 5th, 6th, 3rd. I mean, he has been really, really consistent. The one thing we haven't seen yet is he hasn't really been a threat to win the race. I know at Phoenix he was in the top 5. It says 72% of the race. I mean, that's incredible. But he was never a threat. He was never as fast as some of those other guys. So if you're looking to get involved with Chris Bell at this point, I don't think that outright price is where you should do it. Maybe find a matchup against a guy that you think might struggle a little bit. But at this point in the week, I don't like Chris Bell at that 8 to 1 price.
If they say you don't have bad luck, this driver wouldn't have any luck at all. And that, of course, would be Kyle Larson, the way his 2023 season has started. Widely available in that 8 to 1 range. 5th here in the spring, 14th in the fall. 1 here back in 2017, led 53 laps in that particular race. Now, over the last 3 trips to Richmond, he has sat on the pole in 2 of those 3 races. But this has been a season of bad luck. Fastest car at Fontana, mechanical issue ruined his day. Arguably the fastest car at Las Vegas and Phoenix, but late race restarts did not go his way. In its official debut at Phoenix, Larson turned 316 of 316 laps inside the top 5, was the only driver in this new next-gen low downforce package to accomplish that feat, and he scored 52 fast lap points at Fontana and Phoenix. Larson, 8 to 1. Maybe this is a value proposition, or is it a fair reflection of some of the misfortune that he's had to deal with so far this season?
I think that this is probably, of the group of favorites, I like this bet the most, and here's why. If Larson goes out there and pulls it and looks good at practice, I could see him going off at plus 350. And so I think that that's a drastic market shift on someone like Kyle Larson. So if you are looking to get down on someone at a shorter price, I think that this is where you should look. He's proven that he can win here. Typically not great at tracks that have tire wear, but if you get multiple grooves set up and you need a driver to find a groove that's going to be the fastest, it's going to be the 5 car and Kyle Larson without a question. So I do expect him to be fast this week. He's been qualifying really, really well. If he can just conserve his stuff over the long run, I'd be happy to jump on this guy, even if it's at 6 to 1 or 7 to 1, because he can certainly get it done here. He's proven it in the past, and he's led a lot of laps here as well. So I do think that there is some value at that price of 8 to 1.
They say you can't quantify momentum, and tell that to odds makers who priced William Byron on the open as a favorite at some shops. We've seen his price drift out as numbers have been on the board for 24 to 48 hours as we record here on a Wednesday evening. Finished 3rd here in the spring and may have actually had the best car here during that race. Finished 11th in the fall. Led 122 laps when he finished 3rd in the spring, but showed to have a good car at Phoenix. Did fall off over the longer green flag run late when Kevin Harvick zipped by him there. William Byron, 8 to 1 or thereabouts. How do you go about handicapping the 24 and his expectations?
Well, here's what I do. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this, but that would be the track history. You can go ahead and rip that up with William Byron because it doesn't matter.
That was a pretty
anymore.
Good sound effect. Hopefully that gets picked up in final production.
Okay, perfect. Yes. I at this point, looking at his track history doesn't even matter anymore. I think that you just have to look at how he's running right now. He didn't have a great track history at COTA or even road courses in general. Same with at Phoenix. Yeah, he had pulled it on road courses in the past, but never had been that competitive. I mean, he was super fast. Same at Phoenix. Didn't have a top 5. Went out there and led a bunch of laps early. When we thought, and by the way, both those tracks, both Phoenix and at COTA, we thought that there was a dominant car that went off at, I think, 3-1 or plus 350 maybe, in Tyler Reddick at COTA and Kyle Larson at Phoenix. And Byron went out there and led the laps early on. I mean, he just was unfazed, and he had a ton of speed at both of those tracks. So, man, at a certain point, he's going to be overvalued. I've just yet to see it. And we could see that again this week. You know, if he goes out there and pulls it, you know, we could be looking back and saying, man, we really wish we should have grabbed that 8-1. I don't see it yet. Last week at COTA, I think he opened at 14-1. This is a drastic shift off of that. I know he has led laps here in the past, especially last year in the spring race. He just has to conserve his tires, and we saw it at Phoenix. He started to fall off a little bit. I expect the same thing here at COTA. If we get him, I would rather see us, you know, everyone taking him live, but not necessarily at this point in the week. Because if he does slip up at qualifying, he qualifies 10th or 11th, I think you're going to see a much higher price out of that 2014.
Pair of JGR teammates priced right about the same, roughly 10-1 for Martin Truex Jr. and Denny Hamlin. When you look at Truex Jr., it's been an eternity since he's been able to actually win a race. One top 10 finish in 6 weeks so far this season. It's been 50 starts since he grabbed a checkered flag. Did have a pair of top 10 finishes at Richmond last year, 8 straight top 10s, including 7 of 8 top 5s. Started outside the top 10 just once in the last 12 races here, which obviously has contributed to some pretty strong finishes. When we look at Denny Hamlin, 4 consecutive top 4 runs at Richmond, just 2 top 10 finishes so far this season. 1 here in the spring. It's important that caveat comes that was won mainly on strategy, more so than anything else, in my opinion, than just raw speed, but did follow that up as a top 5 later in the year. Home track for the Chesterfield, Virginia native, has dominated here in the past. 4 wins, 17 top 5s, and over 2,000 laps led. If I'm talking about JGR and those two drivers, we obviously hit on Christopher Bell, Denny Hamlin or Martin Truex Jr., who are you more likely to buy at the current price of 10-1?
I think right now it's Denny Hamlin. I haven't seen anything out of Martin Truex Jr. that even looks like a race-winning car. If we go back to last year, and you know, if you're going to use Phoenix as a comp track of Richmond, which I do to a certain extent, he was really competitive at Phoenix last year. This year, not so much. He was just kind of an afterthought the entire day. And, he started 13th and he kind of ran 18th to 17th, all day long. So definitely didn't have the speed in the race car that he's had in the past. When it comes to Richmond, yes, he's won here. So have a lot of guys. For whatever reason, after him winning the Clash, I thought, whoa, maybe we have a little breakout season here with Martin Truex Jr. Just haven't had the speed in the race car. I don't think he's been comfortable. And for him to struggle at a road course where he's typically a great road course racer, he found himself up there on strategy towards the end, but didn't get the finish he wanted. I think Denny Hamlin right now is running a little bit better than Martin Truex Jr. Obviously, he won last year, albeit with a 3-legged donkey, he said before the race, which always throws me off when you hear a driver say, well, you can't win the Kentucky Derby with a 3-legged donkey. So I went and faded him, and then he won the race. So I'm really happy with Denny Hamlin about that. Not that
that was strategy. That wasn't based on speed. So yes. Denny wasn't technically wrong. He threw a dart, and that dart just happened to land bullseye.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Richmond's not a strategy racetrack, so this is just like a new thing. So I think if Denny Hamlin can win, obviously he can win on speed. He ran kind of up front in the fall race this year, or this past year. So if anyone, I'm buying Denny Hamlin, and you're always getting your money in good with Denny Hamlin at Richmond. If you're getting double-digit odds, I don't have a problem with that at all.
All right, the final guy that I'll put in the favorite bucket, I'm not even going to introduce any of his statistics or anything else because I know you're going to sit there and you're going to fanboy over him like you do every single week so far this season. That, of course, being Kyle Busch, widely available in that exact same price range as his 2 former teammates.
Listen, he hasn't had the speed that we anticipated after he went out there and won Fontana. But he was really competitive last week on the road course. I think that he's just kind of finding his home there with that 8 car. You have a whole new group of people you're working with, and he hasn't had really many bad finishes. When it comes to his actual race card, and like he does have a few spots where he hasn't. He had a 19th at Daytona, 14th at Vegas, but he's had decent race cars. So I think that if there's a place for him to kind of get back into victory lane, this is a really comfortable spot for him. He's won 6 times, and Todd, this stat that you have pulled up, 27 top 10s and 34 starts, that is an incredible feat, I think. So just to be that consistent year in and year out at a track that changes a ton from the spring to the fall, I think Kyle Busch will be a contender this weekend. Yeah,
and if any of my stats are ever wrong on this podcast, encourage all of our listeners to call me out, because I can always fire the intern. So, that's how things work around here. I'm not going to claim any ownership. If they're great nuggets, of course I'll take full credit. If they're wrong, then I can always blame somebody else. That's how shit goes around here. Everything rolls downhill. From the favorites to the value bucket, and of course, value starts with the driver who grabbed the win last week in a Coda, Tyler Reddick, 14-1. But here's the thing about Reddick. He's never led a lap at this track, didn't have a top 10 finish to his credit last year, and while he's riding some momentum, at least theoretically, doesn't have a top 10 finish here in 5 Cup starts. This is a guy, again, not quite like William Byron, who we're going to get to a lot of tracks you may be able to throw out history as we go, but you do wonder if Tyler Reddick is being overvalued on a very different track type than where he dominated last Sunday.
Yeah, and a lot of people are looking at the Phoenix like, well, he had a top 3 there. He kind of backdoored the top 3. It was very important. He took 4 tires on the second to last caution, and then there was another caution, and he was able to basically push William Byron to the win. I think that William Byron needs to send him a Christmas card, because without Tyler Reddick pushing him down the backstretch, I don't think he clears Kyle Larson. And I don't know. I think he's a little overvalued at this point. Tyler Reddick tends to struggle at these high tire wear flat tracks. Like I said, he did have a decent finish at Phoenix, but I don't know that that's going to be indicative of how he's going to run this week. Definitely struggled. Obviously it spun early in the fall last year, and I just don't think Richmond kind of meshes with him yet. But you know what? If he looks good in practice, I will have no problem firing him at shorter odds, because I'd start you after last week. You have to trust the kid as a driver. That was a hell of a finish to that last race. But at this point, I still think he's a little overvalued.
Well, and I'll go the other way, too. If he looks like he's got a car that doesn't unload all that well, he's not a driver I'll hesitate to fade in head-to-head matchups as well, because he doesn't have that track history to fall back on. And I think a lot of the things that we look at, if a guy like Kevin Harvick struggles in practice, okay, I can look at track history. He goes into that memory bank and remembers how to drive, and he's going to take a bad 15th to 20th car and get it inside the top 10. For guys that don't have that proven track record, it's a very different thought process that factors in, which allows ourselves to talk about a guy like Ryan Blaney, who's priced in that very same range. Top 10 finishes, 7th in the spring, 10th in the fall, but I didn't feel like he was all that relevant from starting on the pole in the spring race last year. Did lead 128 laps before the 7th place finish, which was his best career finish. Interesting note, though, he's never finished higher than where he started in this race, and I think that further supports what you've talked about. This is a guy that, if he's got clean air, can be fantastic, but he's not a guy mired in traffic that's going to beat, bang, and do everything he needs to take a mediocre car and put it in a position to win a race.
Yeah, the other thing, too, he struggled at Phoenix this year. So, if you look at last year at Phoenix, he was an animal. He was so fast. I think clearly the fastest car in both races at Phoenix last year. And if you kind of take that same tire, the same car, and bring it here, you'd think he'd run well. A 7th in the spring and 10th in the fall, those are really good runs for him. I don't expect that same thing again this year. He struggled at Phoenix more so than he has in the past. So I'm just like Tyler Reddick, if he looks decent in practice, I actually trust Tyler Reddick a little bit more than I do Ryan Blaney here, just because Ryan does go out there and pull it sometimes and then just disappear into the night. So I'm not high on Blaney. I'm going to need to see a lot from him in practice over the long run in order to back him. At this point, he's also kind of one of the guys I have circled that if he is matched up against some guys that have very little fall off, I have no problem betting against him at this point.
I know you're going to be donning your Melon Man hat and shirt like you do every single Sunday during the course of the Cup season. Ross Chastain, similar bucket as the two drivers we just discussed. A pair of top 20 finishes last year, 19th in the spring, 18th in the fall. Tough to assess since he's had some good finishes at flat short tracks. But here's a driver right now that I just haven't seen the same level of consistency early in this campaign that we did last year. Wondering how you go about handicapping Chastain on a pre-week look.
Yeah, the 14-1 and 20-1 at some places, I think that he opened. He's qualified well there in the fall and led some laps, but was not overly competitive when it came to the race, especially over long runs. He also struggled at Phoenix more than he has in the past. I don't know. I don't see Ross Chastain going out there and leading a bunch of laps and potentially winning this week. Fortunately, you are getting a price. So if you do feel like, he might have a top 5 to 7 car and you can get a little bit down at 20-1, I think that there's probably worse ways to spend your money. But then again, it could just be a sunk cost because, you might just be protecting mentally, you might just be protecting yourself when he does not really have a chance to win this race. I would be shocked if he went out there and led a bunch of laps and was able to win this week.
I'll use the term long shot here, but these are guys, if they have a fast race car under them, are more than capable of winning the race on Sunday. Alex Bowman, Joey Logano, Brad Kay, and then I have one other driver I want to pick your brain about just because of the comments he made in the wake of his wreck last weekend, being Bubba Wallace. But you look at Alex Bowman, he has been the model of consistency and kind of the gold standard so far this season. His 5 top 10s lead the series, and while he may not have had a race-winning car, so to speak, just yet, it's been interesting to watch and how things have gone for him. Joey Logano, 27 career starts at Richmond. Logano has 12 top 5s and 16 top 10 finishes. His average finished just outside the top 10. And when you look at his last 5 trips here, other than the 17th that he finished in the spring race, that's the outlier. 6th in the fall, 5th, 3rd, and 3rd the year before. And Brad Kay, look, I don't even know if we can put much emphasis on the way the 6 car ran last year. Clearly in a much better spot this year for what our expectations are for a co-owner of RFK every time he hits the track in 2023.
Yeah, I actually like all 3 of these guys at these prices. Alex Bowman, he's going to win a race soon. He's been there. His finishes are super, super solid, and he's a good race car driver. He's also a guy that when put in a position to win a race on a restart, he gets it done. And you can call him a hack all you want. I'm going to continue to call him clutch. I think there's a lot of upside on Alex Bowman at 20-1. You look at Logano, I'm kind of shocked at this price. Like, what has Joey Logano done wrong here to deserve a 20-1 price? 6th, 17th, 5th, 3rd, and led a ton of laps at the fall. I think that if there is a guy that you want to get some money on early in the week, I think that Joey Logano has a potential to close much lower than that 20-1 price. So if you are looking to maybe get down on an outright, I certainly think that you don't have to look too much further than that 22. Brad Kay, ran really well at Phoenix, and I think that the more you put the driver in control with this lower downforce package, Brad Kay is a wheelman. And yep. I think that he ran. This was like the first race last year in the spring where I was like, oh, Brad Keselowski's running faster lap times. This was I remember specifically saying, whoa. I remember live betting him at 200-1. I live bet Brad Keselowski at 200-1 at Richmond, a place where he's been very successful, especially in the Xfinity series. He was awesome here. So I've yet to see kind of warranting that 25-1 price. I also don't think you'll see him much shorter than that, even if he goes out there, and I just can't see him looking that great in practice. He's a guy that's, probably look average in practice. If he can get a top 10 qualifying spot, I think he'd be thrilled. But as this race progresses, as the track changes, he learns a little bit, gets comfortable with the car. I could see him working his way to the front. I don't know that I'd take the 25-1 now, but I wouldn't hesitate later in the week.
Hey, it makes a ton of sense. Sometimes you have to try and identify drivers that you want to have a little bit of exposure to if they start the race in a very good position. And for those folks, which I know a lot of our loyal Stay Green listeners do, have access to live betting. So you can't just kind of come in live betting, starting to throw darts. You want to come in with a game plan, looking to identify drivers and try and time your market entry. It's far from a perfect science when it comes to betting NASCAR live, but something to consider there. And last, with Bubba Wallace, here, 26 in the spring, 13th in the fall. But the bigger question I have here is, this is a guy who clearly seems to have confidence issues. He gets interviewed after his wreck last week at COTA, says at 6 seasons in the Cup Series, maybe they have to find a replacement. Worm, in good faith, unless he's got a rocket ship under him, this isn't a driver that I want to bet in the outright market. and I don't want to have any head-to-head matchup exposure on either.
Yeah, he's also always in, like, there's always a story with him, and I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing. You know, we just talked about Alex Bowman. I mean, he pretty much stays off the radar, and he goes out there and he just takes care of his business and gets the finishes he needs. Bubba just has to understand that sometimes a 10th place finish is a good finish, and you don't need to force it. And I thought when he wrecked at Coda, I thought he had a hung throttle because he just didn't. Like, he just plowed right into the...
Yeah, I thought it was a brake line that had been cut or something else had gone completely haywire there.
But then to hear it was actually kind of driver error, it's like, whoa, okay. But he has to... You can't say that on TV. I mean, I know that he wishes he probably could have it back, but you know, these guys are super competitive, and if you're going to be asking, if you're going to throw a microphone right in the losing in Tom Brady's face right after they're walking off the field of losing a game, I don't think he's going to be excited. Now, he's not going to worry about his confidence like Bubba does. I mean, Bubba mentally, he's got to get, he's got to have a little bit more like mental wherewithal and just understand that this is a long season and you're a few races in. I mean, he won a race last year and he was fast at a lot of 1.5 mile tracks. It's going to be hard. He's got also a younger guy in Tyler Reddick on the team that goes out there and had just a spaceship. And so it's got to be hard. I can't say what Bubba's going through is easy, but man, get it together. You're going to be in races this year, and you know, don't sell yourself so short. At first I was kind of like Bubba's being just kind of a jerk, but now it's like, dude, Bubba, let's go. Like we need you in the Cup Series. You deserve to be here. You know, act like it. Act like, hey, I made a mistake, but I'm going to be better next week. Don't fire yourself. I mean, that was just like the last thing you want to hear.
Get him an old competition coach or whatever it takes to try and get his confidence where it needs to be. He does have the talent. He's worthy of the ride, needs to go out there and get the finishes. A driver that, you know, I'll just highlight here, I don't need to spend a ton of time on, who I think is interesting. Again, not endorsing an outright play on him. I'm not sure he's capable of winning the race, but Austin Dillon, priced upwards of, I've seen as high as 80-1, as low as 50-1 at some books. Surprised everybody back in 2020 with a top 5 run at Richmond. Also had a number of top 11 finishes at this track, and it's a guy who may not be in contention for the win, but he's not a guy that I'm itching to try and fade given how the market will price. So another guy I'll put on people's radar there will be Austin Dillon. But Wormser, we've covered a ton of drivers. You've offered up a little bit of thoughts on theory. You've shared your perspective on everything you took away from what could have been a wayward race at Coda last weekend. But it's the time in the show where we find the most actionable element middle of the week before we add to our betting portfolio on race day. Where are you taking our loyal Stay Green listeners with a midweek best bet?
All right. Well, we've actually played this bet already, and it has not moved. So we're going to stick with this.
You're not supposed to share that. We moved it in. Worms, I got to teach you just about everything about how all of this goes. We want to keep it so our listeners can take advantage. We've moved on it. We've done it in a discreet manner to not move the market.
Yes, exactly. Well, sometimes these things get a little fragile, and maybe I'm not the one that moves the market. Who knows, Todd? But we're going to stick with Kyle Busch. I might as well keep riding this train. At Canby sites, Kyle Busch top 10 is minus 157. I like that price.
Playable to what is the question I have to ask, because I know we get people asking questions, and a lot of folks reluctant to lay heavy prices. But when you look at this market, you know, is this playable to $1.75 for a partial position? Do you scale it back up to, you know, minus $1.80? Want to kind of get your take on exactly how you view that?
Yeah, I like it up to 170. I mean, you want me to give him another one? There's another one I like. I mean, let's do another one.
We make the rules around here. So, all right, if you get Kyle Busch and the market hasn't moved, bet him at minus 157. This one we haven't bet yet because we're waiting for our loyal listeners, so it'll probably move Thursday when the show goes live. But go ahead and share with our folks.
Well, I think Alex Bowman's going to finish in the top 10, guys, and he's minus 112. So that's the other bet that I like. Man, the guy's just been so consistent, and he's won here before. Obviously, his Hendrick teammates have a ton of speed. If, you know, they can kind of figure something out in qualifying, and he's going to be mixing it up, I think, up front all day. He could be a guy that even can win this race. So, you know, like we've talked about, I thought there was great value at 20-1 to win the race. Like I said, we haven't moved on that, but I think that, you know, Alex Bowman, top 10, minus 112 is another good bet.
Yeah, we'll wait for the show to go live like we always do, and that's where we take our biggest positions. Want to give you guys a chance to get the same numbers we do, similar to the way that we treat best bets on Sunday, and you guys see how quickly that market goes. So make sure you're checking the Bet the Board website. As always, I'll do my best to tweet it out when it goes live. You usually get about a handful of minutes before that market can get a little bit loose. So take full advantage. Hey, I'm trying to be optimistic around here. I can't help it that we got big movers that listen to the show and sometimes beat us to our own numbers because we want our listeners to get the best of it. But it's the world we live in, and it's the ecosystem that can be a little bit fragile at times. So that's where we'll go. We'll go Kyle Busch if you can get him at a price of minus $1.70 or less, and then Alex Bowman a top 10 as well. Any final words of wisdom, parting shots, things you would like to share with our loyal listeners, Wormser, before we bid them a fond farewell and reconvene the same time next week to talk about a little Bristol dirt?
Oh, I'll tell you what. I know that I say I will not be betting the Indy. I'm not going to bet the Indy road course as much as I bet the COTA road course. I need to make sure that, after watching that, these road course finishes can get crazy, and to see matchups flip and flop back and forth like that was really, really tough. So I'll show a little bit more restraint when it comes to matchups, especially at Indy, but I do like Sonoma, and I do think that Watkins Glen will offer also some value. So the great part about this season is we've been to so many different tracks. I mean, we've been to Daytona, Fontana, Vegas, Phoenix, Atlanta, COTA, now Richmond, and next week is Bristol, then Martinsville. I mean, all of these tracks are so very different. I'd like to see someone other than Hendrick Motorsports look good this week. I think that'd be great for the sport, and also add a little value to our betting cards. So I'm hoping that Hendrick doesn't dominate, because I think that we're going to see these guys open really short prices if they continue to look fast in practice and in qualifying and then race well. So hopefully we can mix it up with this Kyle Busch and Alex Bowman this week.
Yeah, crew chiefs out there that are listening, men in the fab shop and everywhere else, try and make your cars a little faster. We need parity in the betting market to give Worm and the Stay Green community plenty of opportunities to try and bet into markets and numbers that'll offer a little bit of value and upside. So best of luck with all of your wagers this weekend at the track. We'll be back with you next week for a little Bristol Dirt, but hopefully with an Alex Bowman and Kyle Busch top 10 ticket in hand come Sunday afternoon. We'll see you at the window.